So here we are again, and today we are going to talk about the Nikon Z5, and we're going to look at the settings, the menus, how I've set this up to use this as a wedding camera, how it compares to the D780, and what my thoughts are after the wedding 2 or 3 days ago. My first wedding with the Z5, my second wedding of this year. So, did it do the job? On my wedding 2 or 3 days ago, did it do what I wanted it to do? And the answer is absolutely yes. Plus, it's a Nikon, it feels wonderful, it's got great ergonomics, all the controls make sense, everything works properly. It has got the latest update that I've just done, that Nikon came out with just a few weeks ago, and I found the autofocus to be every bit as good as the Sony A7 III that, you know, I photographed 35 odd weddings with that, so I got to know it quite well, even though I didn't love it. And in some ways, this I think is superior. I much prefer the colours from Nikon, and just the way the things work. So I'm very pleased I got it, and what I did when I first got it was I used my knowledge of Nikon and of mirrorless cameras via Sony to set this up in a way that I thought would work at the wedding I did a couple of days ago. I nearly got it right. There were a few things I didn't quite get right, and I'm going to run through those when we talk about the menu and the user settings in a moment. And I, even if you're not a wedding photographer, and you're probably not, I hope you find this useful, because my aim with all this is to make this camera into something that's as easy to use and as flexible and fast as my D780. Now, with the D780, I'm, as I say, I've used these for goodness knows how long. With all the buttons, it's all set up the way I want it to be. I can do anything I want to with a press and a turn of a dial, and I've never used the user settings on the dial here, either on this or the D750 that I had for a couple of years before that. The D700 and the professional range of cameras don't have the user settings on the mode dial. They're buried in the menu, and they are total rubbish. Why Nikon ever thought that was the right thing to give professional photographers, I've no idea. This is the right thing to give professional photographers, and I'm pleased to say that the Z5 has got 3 user settings, presets that you can use, and I've been playing with this again since the wedding because I wanted to make a few changes. And you can literally set this up to be 3 different in fact, if you include video, 4 different cameras. In fact, if you include manual and aperture monitor, you can set it up to be 5 or 6 different cameras. And I mean literally, you can change buttons, you can change what buttons do in different presets. It's not just the stuff in the menu. You can physically change the way the camera works, should you want to. I don't, but the option's there. So it may be that you photograph wildlife one day and landscape the next. Obviously you want the camera to be 2 different cameras for doing that kind of work, so you can just set the presets, and it's absolutely brilliant. It really is good. So that's something I'm going to go through in the menu very shortly. And in fact, I think we'll do that now, because I think I've said enough about the Z5. It's a brilliant camera. I'm going to be using it for the rest of this year at least. So what I'm going to do is go through just the menu settings that I change. And then we'll look at how I set up the presets to make this a really, really fast to use, very, very flexible camera. Right, so let's just jump into the menu. So on the playback menu, as I say, I'm not going to go through everything, just those things I've changed. Playback display options. This is what you want to display when you look at an image on the back of the screen. This is what you want to, the information that you want to come up with. I choose the focus point, the exposure information, and the highlights, just to make sure I haven't blown any highlights out. That's really about it. I don't have anything else, so that's all I have there. I have the image review off. I find it distracting if it keeps popping up in the viewfinder. I'm used to using a DSLR where you only get the image review on the back screen, and it's there if you want it. You do have that option. You can have the monitor only, as you can see there, which means if you're looking through the viewfinder, which is the way I shoot 90% of the time, it won't come up in the viewfinder. But it also, if you're looking through the viewfinder, it doesn't come up on the monitor, even though that's what you selected, because your eye is close to the eyepiece. The monitor doesn't work anyway, so it's a good idea, but I'm afraid it doesn't work in practice. It would be nice if it did come up on the rear screen, but if you're using the viewfinder, it doesn't come up on the rear screen anyway. So I'll just leave that off. Rotate tool, I turn off. Which means if you take a photo in portrait mode, then it will fill the entire screen and you'll have to turn the camera 90 degrees, which is great, which is what I want. That's how I took the shot, and I'm quite happy to turn the camera to see the full image filling the image filling the screen. Otherwise, you just get a small area where the image is upright on the rear screen, but it means it's a really small image. So I turn that off. And that is it for the playback menu. Photo shooting menu, what have we got here? You can rename the storage folder and the file naming. The role played by slot 2, I always have 2 cards, obviously, which is why I'm using this and not the Z6, which I did look at 2 years ago at buying that, but because it only had 1 card slot, I decided that wasn't for me. So with 2 card slots, I have RAW and JPEG. Now, the reasoning, my logic behind that is that how often is a card going to fail? Very, very, very rarely, but it could happen. And if the very worst happened and the card that I'm writing the RAW files to failed, I've got fine quality JPEGs on the second card. That would be good enough. I could survive. It just means it's quicker to write to the cards. If you're writing 2 RAW files, it's a bit slower. It's probably not a huge deal. If you want to write RAW files to both cards, I'm sure you can do, but that's just the way I use it. Image quality, RAW plus fine with a star, so they're very good quality JPEGs. Image size, large. RAW recording I have as 14-bit with lossless compressed turned on. I've always used that. ISO sensitivity we'll come back to. White balance, auto, pitch control, I just use Vivid, but you can use whatever you want, obviously. Color space, I leave it sRGB. Again, that's what I've always used. And somewhere we've got vibration reduction. Make sure that's turned on. Again, the focus mode and the AF area we'll come to shortly when we actually come to set up the the user presets. And that is it for the photo shooting menu. Everything else stays as it is. The RAW files, the JPEG files, I just leave everything turned off or as they are at standard. There's no changes I make in the rest of that menu. Movie. Now, if you bought this camera to do movies with, well, I don't suppose you have actually, because the movie shooting is, and that's one other thing that is not quite as good as the Z6 II. The frame size and rate, I use 1080p 60 frames a second in case, and I probably do, occasionally want to do slow-mo, so I can slow them down nicely. Movie quality high, MP4. It does do 4K at 30 frames a second. It doesn't do 60 frames a second, which I believe the Z6 II does, and also applies a big crop to the frame if you use 4K, hence why I use 1080p. For me, that's plenty good enough for my highlight videos that I do at weddings. Okay, continuing, custom settings. We'll go through these. I have it face and eye detect on, and there's one user setting where I don't want it turned on. I'll explain this when we get there. But you don't have to come back to the menu to turn it off. That's just going to be far too slow for me, so that's one of the user settings that we'll be looking at shortly. Focus point use, I use half the focus points, so when I do want to move the focus point, it's a lot quicker. Store points by orientation, make sure that's, well, for me anyway, I make sure it's on. So it means if I have the focus point up high in landscape here, say at the top of the screen, when I turn the camera to portrait mode, it moves to wherever I want the focus point to be in portrait mode, and it saves that. I just find that useful. Now, AF activation off. So do you want the shutter to change to focus or not focus? Well, I use back button focus for everything, so I don't want it focusing. So the shutter is AF. The AF on button, this one, is the only one that does focusing. The shutter doesn't do focusing. Limit AF area mode selection. I have limited it. You've got quite a wide choice there, and if you do want to scroll through and pick a particular AF area mode, it takes a while. So I don't use all of those, so they're the ones that I've chosen: the single point, the wide area small, and the auto area. Just makes it a bit quicker to use the camera. Focus point wraparound, again I've turned that on, it makes it a little bit quicker as well. Low light AF, if you turn that on, you will get better AF performance in low light, but you will get worse AF performance in normal light. Therefore, it might be useful on some occasions, but don't turn it on for the majority of your shots during daylight. Built-in AF assist illuminator, I think I've turned that off on every camera I've ever owned. I've never ever used that, but up to you. I certainly don't like pointing a light at someone when I'm taking their pictures. What else we got? Shutter release button. You can just have the shutter button to take the photo, to operate the shutter, or half press will lock the exposure, and that is what I have on, so that I can use the back button to do the focusing, half press the shutter, lock the exposure. If I want, I can recompose, and it just makes the camera very easy to use. Flash sync, where's that gone now? Flash sync speed 200th, and choose auto FP, so you get high speed sync. Another one that I found useful is exposure compensation for flash, background only. So if I'm taking a shot with flash and I want the background to be darker than the rest of the scene, then background only will do that. If you choose the entire frame, then you'll get the background darker, and you'll also get the flash shooting a lower level, so you'll get your actual subject darker as well. So I use that background only. Modeling flash off again, which then gets us on to custom controls. And you probably want to set yours up differently to what I use. You've probably got your own way of using your camera now, and you probably want to set them up differently to what I use, but this is what I have used on DSLRs for a long time, and that is the function 1 button is my menu. We've now got, well, in fact, I haven't used this on DSLRs because they haven't had this sort of level of functionality. So the function 2 button is set to the AF area mode selection and the focus mode. Previously on DSLRs to the, I'm not sure I can show you, over this side. So around here at the front of the lens, you've got the focus mode selector, a little lever to go from AF auto to manual and so on. It's got a button in the middle, and that button was dedicated to doing this job. That doesn't exist now on this camera, so it's the function. It's simply switched from the left hand side of the camera to the right hand side of the camera, but you do need to program that. The AF on button is, as you would expect, autofocus is turned on. The joystick is as yet unprogrammed. It's just doing the same as the it just moves the focus point back to the center of the frame. Maybe in the future I'll find a different use for it, but that at the moment is what I use it for. And I've just realized that we've actually got that button on there twice, so I'm not quite sure why that is. As I say, I've only had this about 4 days. So we've got that's showing us that's the joystick, and that is also showing us the joystick. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that further. The video button is to record video. And I don't have any lenses. I don't have any Z mount lenses with buttons on, so the last two are fairly irrelevant. And if we continue on through, we can customize the command dials. Now, I don't change any of these apart from the menus and playback. This is set to off, I believe, and it's this feature which will allow you to, when you're reviewing images, if you turn it on, you can use the rear dial here to scroll through the images, which is a real advantage because, let me show you, and it's quite difficult to find. It's buried there in the menus. Let me just, do bear with me, I was doing some testing. If you zoom in, then if you don't have that set to on, what you've got to do is zoom out and go back to the previous image, and so on. You can zoom in again, but if you try and go left or right, it will use this button here, this dial at the top, the back dial. So if you turn that to on, what it means you can do is zoom in and you roll through images with it zoomed in, or you can zoom out and you can use the dial to scroll through the images. Much easier than using the left and right buttons on the D-pad, I think. Movie we've looked at, so then going on to setup menu, and this is where the save the user settings is. We'll come on to that very shortly. The other ones, I don't really change anything in the setup menu, I don't think, just looking at my notes. No. You can obviously set the time and date and all that kind of stuff, but that's really about all you're going to find in there. The retouch menu, obviously, I don't use. Now, my menu, you simply go to, when you first get the camera, you go to add items and you click on that, and you can choose which menu you want to add things from. I've got, I think that's the top, yeah. I've got set picture control. When I'm using, and the reason I've got that in there is when I'm using a manual focus lens, and because I'm using my D lenses, some of my D lenses on this camera, they're obviously only manual focus. There's no autofocus with the D lens, only G lenses. Using the focus peaking is much easier with a black and white image, so I would switch to monochrome, and that will make taking and that will make manual focusing, I find, much easier. If you've got a colour, if you're looking at a colour screen with any colour peaking, it's sometimes difficult to make it out. So that's why it's up there, so I can quickly change that. Now, ISO settings is turned, auto ISO is turned on. The native ISO, or the lowest ISO it will use, is set to 100. Maximum is 25,600, and if that sounds high, I've used 25,600 on the D780 at a wedding last Christmas, when it was really, really dark in a really, really dark hotel. Many of the shots were taken at 25,600, and they were fine. They're not perfect, but they're certainly very, very usable. Minimum shutter speed, because I'm mainly photographing people in different situations, even if someone's not doing anything particularly active, if they're just standing there talking to other people, there's still some movement. They still move their head, and 200th of a second is needed to actually get a sharp image if you're shooting people. I have image review off, but it's easily accessible should I want to turn it on, which sometimes I do. Low light AF, again, it's there if I want to quickly access the low light AF, and there will probably be some other silent photography is also there. Again, if I want to find it quickly and turn it on, I can do just with one press. The function 1 button gets me my menu, and it's very quickly. It's very quick. You can also program the I menu, and you can have a completely different set of things in here to what you have in my menu. I haven't yet got to that point with this, but I've just put in here the things that I find useful at the moment. Right, let's now deal with setting up a user setting, because this is where I think this camera is going to be really, really good for the future for flexibility. First of all, give some thought to how do you want the camera to work? Let's take two extreme examples. Let's say you do wildlife shooting and landscape. Okay, so for wildlife shooting, you're probably going to want continuous autofocus, fast focus, maybe wide area. You maybe want a particular colour profile because you're outside. Maybe you want the camera set to fast burst rather than a single shot, and all sorts of things like that. Think about how you want to set the camera up. Then, using your mode dial on top, go to whichever of the modes you would use. I mainly use aperture priority, but you might choose S, you might choose P, you might choose M. Choose which one you would actually shoot at, because what you're trying to do now is set the camera up as you want it for one of your types of photography. You then go through and you set everything the way you want it to be set. So do all the settings, everything you want, exactly as you would like it to be. You then simply go to the menu, and in the Tools menu, simply go to Save User Settings, and you can save it to U1. You simply go right, OK to save the settings, and you're done. What I've done now is I want to keep everything the same as I've just set, but I want the focus mode not to be single shot, which is what it is in U1. I want it to be continuous focus. I want the area, sorry, if I switch to, let me just show you, if I switch to, so U1, I have single shot, wide area. So I've got the box here. I can move the box to wherever I want. I can use the joystick if I want. I've got spot metering, which basically this is focus and recompose. So I can use the back button, which will focus. I can use the half press the shutter, which will lock the exposure. I could then recompose and take the shot. And I do that a lot. It's quick, it's fast, it's accurate, and it's what I've done for many, many years. But I also want face detection. Now, if I want face detection here, I would switch to continuous autofocus, and I would need to change from wide, small box to the whole screen so that face detect kicks in. What I've done is I've kept all the settings the same, but I've now on U2, I've changed to AFC, and we're using the whole screen, so we've got wide area. We've already got face detection turned on anyway, so it instantly pops up and I've got face detect. Sorry, wrong button. So I've got face and IAF. So I can do that. I can lock the exposure with a half press of the shutter, and let me just release the camera. So I can move all over the place and take the shot. Now, there are occasions when I want to do exactly that, but I don't want face and eye detect on. Prime example. And in fact, if you look over here at my picture on the wall over there, this was a shot that I took years ago. But a couple of days ago at the wedding, I did something very similar. So I took a shot with her with a face in focus, but I then wanted a shot looking up. So I knelt down and I looked up, and I wanted her bokeh in focus and her face out of focus. Now, of course, if you've got face detect on, you can't do that. It's always going to focus on her face. So I want a way to turn face detect off very quickly, and that's what I've now got. I've turned that off. I can now focus on whatever I want to with continuous autofocus, and again, half press the shutter, lock the exposure, take the shot. It's just a really quick way for me to get all the shots I want with minimal fuss, 100% reliability. and it just makes the camera fantastic to use. Now, I've nearly finished. Bear with me. If you go back to aperture priority, which is what I use most of the time, you've basically got a fourth setting, because you can have things different here to what you've saved in U1, U2 or U3. So this is basically a fourth setting. You can then switch to video, and video is completely separate, and you can set the video up to be, again, a completely different set of settings to stills photography. So you've basically got 5 different sets of settings that you can use, and you have an incredibly flexible camera that will do anything you want at a moment's notice. So I hope you found that useful. That's what I do, that's how I use it, and if you've got any queries, obviously get back to me, and maybe do another video if I need to. And thank you very much for watching. Cheers for now.